In this session, we are going to look into how to write literature review by focusing on a practical example. And what are the contents of today's session? Initially, we look into a sample framework. Then, how should we structure our literature based on that particular sample framework? What should be included in the literature review? How do we search for literature review using Mendeley, Google Scholar, and QDA Minor Lite? How do we search for a particular theory to explain the relationships? How do we download and store the literature? How do we extract critical information? How do we start writing the literature? How do we structure our literature? Now, this is the sample framework that I've developed just for the sake of this particular session. Now, how do you develop such frameworks? In order to do this, you have to look into what existing research is available. There are 3 or 4 sessions available on the channel that actually highlight how one can develop a model from scratch. The links for those sessions are shared in the description. So once you see those videos, you will be able to develop such frameworks for your own study as well. Now, once you have the model, once you have your framework, the next step is you start writing your literature. And when you are writing your literature, it has got 2 parts. The first one is individual discussion on variables, whereby you discuss the variables, the constructs in your study individually. The second part is development of hypothesis, whereby you present your theoretical framework and develop hypothesis. Now we'll be looking into the structure or what to include in each of these sections. Now when you are doing individual discussion on variables, in our case we had 4 variables: servant leadership, career commitment, empowerment at work, and life satisfaction. Career commitment and empowerment at work are our mediators, while servant leadership and life satisfaction, servant is independent, life satisfaction is dependent variable. Now, before we develop the relationship between these variables as to how servant leadership fosters career commitment, how servant leadership leads to empowerment at work, how servant leadership affects life satisfaction, and how career commitment, empowerment at work could mediate the relationship between servant leadership and life satisfaction. Before we go into that detail, we need to first discuss these variables individually, separately, I mean. Now, what we do normally in our literature review is we give separate headings. Number 1, servant leadership. Number 2, career commitment. Number 3, empowerment at work. And number 4, life satisfaction. Now, what do you include in each of these, or what do you include when you are doing individual discussion on these variables? We'll be looking at this in this particular session. Now, when you are developing your theoretical framework and presenting your hypothesis, there could be 2 structures that you can follow. I followed both of them, and I'll show you the example in the paper in which I followed this particular structure. The first one is you first explain the relationship between your IB, which is in this case servant leadership, and your dependent variable, which is in this case life satisfaction. Then you directly go to your mediating role of career commitment and mediating role of empowerment at work. Whereby what you do is you first identify how IV relates with MV, which is career commitment, and how career commitment relates with life satisfaction. And obviously, then you do the same for the second mediator or third mediator. Another approach could be a bit more detailed approach. This is more or less followed in thesis, obviously, could be done in papers as well. So what you do is you explain each relationship separately. After you've done the individual discussion, you explain the relationship between the 2 variables separately. So each hypothesis presented separately after discussion on the relationships. Now, I've done this in 2 of my papers. Let's have a look at it. Now, here is one paper. So how it is done is you go to your literature review and first you explain the variables individually. So what I've done is I've explained servant leadership. Followed by this, the next step is Servant leadership and career satisfaction, each relationship done separately. Although I did not explain career satisfaction and life satisfaction separately, but what I did was that before going into the detail as to how these variables are related with each other, I defined the other variable and then my arguments. So career satisfaction and life satisfaction, this is H1. So servant leadership and career satisfaction. Career satisfaction is mediator. Career and life satisfaction. So career is mediator, life satisfaction is dependent, separate heading. Then servant leadership and life satisfaction, your IV and your DV. And in the end, mediating role of career satisfaction. So this is one approach that one could follow. The other approach could be, you do not explain each of the relationships separately. But what you do is, you explain the main variable, corporate social responsibility in this case, and then corporate social responsibility and organizational performance. This is your IV, this is your DV. And then mediating role of team outcomes. So each team outcome and how it mediates the relationship between CSR and OP done separately, followed by its hypothesis. So this is how you can structure your literature review. Both approaches are correct and both can be followed. So you can either make a concise literature or theoretical framework and hypothesis development section, whereby rather than explaining each relationship separately as done in structure 2, what you can do is you can present your IV and DV and how they are related with each other, followed by the mediating roles, whereby you explain how servant leadership affects career commitment and then how career commitment leads to life satisfaction. And then in the end, you can say there is a causal relationship between these variables. Hence, you propose that career commitment could mediate the relationship between the two variables. So both of these structures can be used in a research paper or a thesis. And what do you write in these sections? This is particularly important. When you are discussing your variables individually, the literature review shall start with the discussion on the variables individually. First, scholars shall discuss servant leadership, then career commitment, followed by empowerment at work, and finally life satisfaction, and all of them discussed separately. And what should be included in this individual discussion? You start with the concept of variable as to what is this variable? What is the general definition or what is a prevalent definition in the literature? Now, if you are focused on a particular area, you should focus or you should try to find if there is any definition in that particular area for that particular concept. Now, if you're writing a thesis, you could obviously focus on how the definitions have evolved or changed over time. Obviously, within a paper, you might not have enough space to write all these things. So you focus on key aspects. What are the key characteristics, traits, or facets that emerge from those definitions? What do these definitions agree on, or whether there is a conflict on conceptualization of these definitions or this variable? And what does this variable do for organization? Why is it important to be studied in, for example, let's say higher education, for example, let's say in non-governmental sector or public sector? When you're writing a thesis, it is strongly advised that you follow or you put in all these things. But when you're writing a paper, more or less, I think 1, 2, and 6, they should always be there. Obviously, if you've got space and you can put in all the other things, well and good. So these are the things, these are the points, these are the critical ingredients when you are individually discussing a variable. You start with the conceptualization and you end with why this particular variable shall be studied. Why is it important in your field of study? Moving on, once you have done the individual discussion on variables, the next step is, before going into the detail as to what should be included when developing relationship between variables, you should search for what theory can be utilized to explain these relationships. This is very important because majority of the papers are rejected because they do not have a particular theory explaining the relationship. Now, how do you search for the theory? In order to search for the theory, what you can do is you can use Mendeley or Google Scholar, or even QDA Minor Lite. In this case, we are taking the example of Mendeley or Google Scholar. In order to learn how to use Google Scholar, there is a session. The link will be shared in description. In this case, we are going to use Google Scholar. Now have a look here. Our interest is servant leadership, life satisfaction, mediated by career commitment and empowerment at work. Now, for instance, I'm interested in identifying how leadership affects life satisfaction and what theory can be utilized to explain this relationship. So what I can do is I've created this query here. So I'm interested in that satisfaction should be part of the title, leadership should be the part of the title, and there should be theory in the text. So what theory has been utilized to explain the relationship between leadership and satisfaction? Obviously, you can change it with servant leadership as well. But obviously, let's say there is not much research on how servant leadership affects satisfaction or life satisfaction. So we are going for a general theory that explains how leadership could affect satisfaction. So let's copy this string here and put it in Google Scholar. Now there are few papers written on how servant leadership, how leadership affects satisfaction. And let's say what theory has been used. If you look here, the utility of transactional and transformational leadership for predicting performance and satisfaction within a path goal theory framework. So leadership and satisfaction has been explained using path goal theory. So yes, you can use this theory to explain the relationship between variables. So this is how you can search for theory. Let's say now that we have found a theory to explain the relationship between leadership and life satisfaction or satisfaction. Now we want to find out whether this theory has been used with servant leadership or not. So what you can do is, obviously I've created this string. I am going to copy it and put it in here. And let's see if path goal theory has been used with servant leadership. Yes, it has been used with servant leadership. Open the paper. Obviously, there is a paper on how servant leadership affects job satisfaction. So this can guide you as to how servant leadership could affect life satisfaction as well. Help you propose your literature, help you write your literature. There is another few examples. See these in bold. These are obviously mentioned here as well. Path goal, servant leadership, path goal theory. So you can download these papers. This is how you can search for literature as well. Critical literature using these Google strings, helping you, or Google will help you or to point out directly at the literature that you want to quote in your study. You do not have to read 300, 400 papers. But again, there is a word of caution here. This does not mean that you do not have to read the papers. I strongly advise my students and those who watch me on YouTube that you should read at least 20 to 30 latest researches on the variables of your interest. This will help you conceptualize the concept in a clear manner and will help you or improve your writing as well. Because if you do not read, you won't be able to write. So it's very important that you read quality papers. Otherwise, you won't be able to write quality research. So please do read and then use these tools for your advantage. If you do not read, you won't know what to write. So in order to make best use of these tools that I've been guiding the people on, you have to make sure that you use these tools after you have done your reading. Once you have found out the theory that you are going to use, start reading about the theory. Get well acquainted with the theory. So you know how you are going to use its argument to develop the relationship. Moving on. Now the next step is how to write when developing framework to establish relationships. The first thing that you should do is you should find out, has previous studies linked the two concepts? If yes, what were their findings? Now, how do you find out whether or not previous studies have linked the relationship? Again, you can use Google Scholar, or you can search through papers that are there in Mendeley, or you can use QDA Minor Lite. If you are going to, obviously there is a video, a detailed video on how to use QDA Minor Lite for your literature review. Plus, I'm going to do one or two strings to help you identify how to use QDA Minor Lite to search for relationships. Were the findings of the previous studies unanimous or, on the other hand, contradictory? For instance, one study found a positive relationship between the two concepts. The other study might have found the negative relationship between two variables. Or the third study might have found no relationship. So these are not unanimous, these are contradictory. And this obviously gives rise to or stimulates the need for further research in this particular area. Now, you should also explain why studying this relationship is important. This why aspect is actually your contribution to your research. Now, what if there has been no study on the two variables, on the linkage between two variables? Then obviously, first you have to use theory to explain the relationships. And the second thing is you can use the dimension or traits of independent variable and link it with the dependent variable. And same the other way around. Use theory to develop linkages. This will strengthen your literature review. Once you have found the theory, read the theory and see the papers that have used that particular theory and how they have used that particular theory to develop relationships. Just like in this example here. In this case, LMX has been used to explain the relationship between servant leadership and life satisfaction. Now, this has been used to explain servant leadership on job satisfaction. So, how it can be used to explain its relationship or servant leadership's relationship with life satisfaction? So, once you read this paper, you would know how to use a particular theory to explain the relationship. Same is the case, you can read other papers as well that have used theory to explain the relationship between variables. This will help you, guide you to know or to understand how to use theories to explain the relationship between variables. Now, once you are reading through the paper, you need to store information. Now, in order to download the papers, obviously you have to go for different databases. Like for example, say you can go for Emerald, you can go for Sage, Sage Publications. Let's say you can go for sciencedirect.com. Your university or your institution will have access to these journals. It's always a good idea to just focus on good research journals published in Sage, Springer, Science Direct, Wiley, Taylor and Francis, Emerald. These are good databases. And once you are going through the paper, reading through the paper, you can store this information in your Excel sheet. Here is this Excel sheet, the title of the paper, the objectives, research questions. So I've just developed this Excel sheet, which you can obviously do yourself as well. And add these as your columns. And while you are reading through the paper, add these things because they will help you develop your or write your literature review in the future as well. Moving on. Once you start writing the literature review, the first thing is obviously individual discussion on variables. How do you go for individual discussion on variables? Let's say I want to search for definition of servant leadership in Google Scholar. So I can use this particular string. So search for within the text. If the text has define and servant leadership as text. So here are your results. Now if you look into this particular text here, so what they are doing is, okay, Patterson model of servant leadership included 7 virtuous constructs that define servant leadership and shape their attitudes. You can download this paper and have a look how they define servant leadership. Now here it is, they have defined servant leadership as well. So once you write such text, what Google does for you is it looks into the paper and then you can have selective or you can extract selected papers which actually serve your purpose. That is, they have defined servant leadership. Similarly, you can look for other concepts as well. Or what you can do is you can use QDA Minor Lite as well. In this case, what I've done is I've put in a few papers on servant leadership in this software. So what you can do is, obviously, in order to learn how to use it, there is a video. The description will be, or the link for the video will be shared in the description. And what I do is I go for retrieval, text retrieval, and I've already built this string, which I'm going to paste here. Not allowing to paste, so what you can do is, or what you should rather do is, you have to type it on your own. So servant leadership, and I'm interested in searching for its definition. So definition might come with certain keywords: define, refer, or state. And in this case, let's say I'm interested in define. Do not need to be in like strings, or refer, or state. And what we do is we search. And similarly, if you've got papers on other concepts and you put it in QD Minor Lite, just change the word servant leadership with life satisfaction or career commitment or any other. So let's say I've clicked here, and this is the text that has got, or this is the sentence that has got either the word define, state, or servant leadership with the text define, state, or refer. But is it good enough for my study? Well, it doesn't look so. No. So obviously there are around 422 hits. So you have to go for different, obviously, hits and see which one fits your requirement. So what it has done is within, like, I have got around 222 papers. Within those 222 papers, it has found 422 sentences which matches that particular description. So what you do is just look into what fits your requirement. Moving on. The next step is, let's say, once we have found the definition and we have written about the individual discussion, obviously we can copy other text from this particular paper as well, and there are the details of this paper as to the title and everything in text format, so you can copy it. Now I'm interested in discussing the relationship between variables, so I can use Google Scholar for it. Let's say I'm interested in writing about servant leadership and life satisfaction. So I've copied this string, and let me put it in here, and let's press enter. So are there any papers that have studied the relationship between servant leadership and life satisfaction? Well, yes, there are a few. There is this one, then there is this by Chohtai, there is this by me and my other co-authors. So obviously you can download these papers, look into as to how they are explaining the relationship between variables. And these are latest papers, will help you obviously project the need for your study as well. Again, you can use QDA Minor Lite as well. I've already developed the string, but obviously I have to write it again. So let's go to retrieval, text retrieval, and let's say I'm interested in servant leadership and life satisfaction. So I've got 113 sentences whereby there is servant leadership and life satisfaction in a single sentence. So you do not have to read through all these 222 papers. You can obviously see which text matches your requirement, and then just right click it, copy it, paste it onto your document. And again, you can have the reference by just selecting the title of the paper, put it in Google Scholar, and you can have the details. Otherwise, once you click this particular case here, the paper is highlighted as well. So this is how you can search for literature when you are developing relationship between variables using QDA minor light. Another one, servant leadership and empowerment, obviously the same can be done using QDA minor light. So the objective of this whole exercise today was to help you understand how you can structure your literature review and how you can use these tools for writing your literature review. I hope the video session would have helped you understand how to obviously use these tools, plus how to understand how to structure your literature. For more videos on these tools, there are detailed videos on how to use these tools in on the channel. So please look into them. Thank you very much.